Welcome to episode number 49 of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast, the show where I talk to introverts who grow their business and make a difference. I'm Sarah Senecroce, your host, and so happy that you're spending this time with me today again. On my walk this morning, I discovered the first crocus, and that made me so happy. I'm so done with winter, but there's actually still snow lying outside of my window. In today's episode, I'm talking to Lucy Griffiths, and I'll tell you more about her in a minute. In our chat, Lucy mentions how she struggled going into a new office in another country and having to present herself as the new girl. This made me think of the new trendy open office space where you no longer have your own desk, never mind your own office, and how that's such an extroverted model. And I did some research on this, and it seems like even though this was very trendy a few years ago, they now actually realized it was maybe not the most efficient model. Research suggests open office distractions sabotage employee focus and decreasing productivity anywhere from 15 to 28%. And yet, open plan design still represents 70% of all US offices, and they are still expanding this model everywhere. So, just some thoughts on that open office model, and if you are working in an open office space and would like to get in touch and let me know how that feels for you as an introvert, I'd be really curious to hear from you, so send me a message. Now back to the conversation with Lucy Griffiths. So Lucy's a video strategist and coach. She helps female entrepreneurs get confident on camera and learn strategies to grow their business using video. She has a master's in coaching and works in a very positive and gentle way to get the best out of her clients on camera. Lucy spent 20 years working as a TV and radio reporter and has reported from all over the world, including North Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and has interviewed A-listers like Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman on the red carpet, and interviewed presidents and politicians like Barack Obama, Tony Blair, and Hillary Clinton. So you're definitely in for a treat. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Lucy Griffiths. Hi, Lucy. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. Great to speak to you.
Yeah, again, very great to speak to you too. It's been a while that I haven't had a conversation with someone in England, so I'm glad to go back to England today. Lucy, tell me a little bit about yourself and, how my introverted audience can relate to your story.
Okay, so I am a video strategist, and I've been working in the field of video and television for the last 20 years. I started out as a radio and TV reporter, and I was lucky enough to travel around the world and go to some really amazing and also slightly bonkers, crazy countries to work. Places like North Korea and Iraq, and set up TV stations or create bureaus around the world. So really fascinating. But it was very intense, very long hours, often working in conflict zones, and was, dealing with extreme poverty or, corruption or very difficult, challenging situations, which really took its toll mentally and physically. And when I left China, I was so ready to do something different, and I was desperate. And I'm sure many other people can relate, that sort of desperate to do something different, to set up their own business and to really be their own boss and not have to deal with office politics and crazy meetings at funny hours of the day, or all of those things that we kind of, when we work in global international companies, we have to be part of their system, and we can be so sucked into it. And corporate culture, as much as we love our job and we feel so passionate about our job. I mean, I remember the day I left to go on maternity leave, I stayed till 8:30 at night, so all my paperwork was in order and, all the bureaucracy. And I look back and I think, why on earth did I do that? But we're so sort of ingrained in the way that we live and this corporate bubble that it's very hard to leave. And when I finally plucked up the courage, I'd always had this kind of, I guess people call it a side hustle. So I had this coaching business on the side, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So I had that on the side and I was desperate to kind of take it full time. And it was only when I had my son, when I was pregnant, I realized, okay, you've got to make this work. You can't go back to, I found out I was pregnant and I was, just about to go off to Ukraine and be in the middle of a war zone. And, I was hiding in ditches with the rebels. And, that's not the kind of place that you want to be when you're pregnant or when you're a mother. It's just, I know women that do it, but that was not a place for me. So I was desperate to leave and do something totally different. When I was on my maternity leave, I really pushed to, create a business that was sustainable, that would give me enough income so that I didn't have to go back to work. So I had my coaching business, which I'd already had as my side hustle. And I then, was determined to take that and go full steam ahead. I also had another sideline business as doing property renovation and Airbnbs. So I sort of was determined to have as many income streams as possible just to, to make this happen. And luckily enough, it did. But, there were definitely moments where I thought, oh, goodness, I'm going to have to go back to, and I couldn't face the thought of going back to sort of dropping my son at nursery at 7 a.m. and picking him up at sort of 6:30 at night and being the person who's a late mum to pick up their son and all of those kind of being on the naughty step at nursery, all of those issues, which I saw with my colleagues who really struggle with childcare and fitting in. In corporate culture, it's almost like motherhood is something where it's almost shameful. You sneak out the door and it's embarrassing and your colleagues look at you with disdain. And I didn't want to be that person. I wanted to leave on a high and be a success in the corporate world and then leave and do something very different. And rather than going back in and sort of being the person who's like the ones people silently eyeball roll and, they sort of look at you as though it's like, oh God, she's got to go again. And
she's kind of like being demoted now because she's a mom and now she's only doing like half time or 60% or something like that.
And and I see that so often with particularly in like a media environment, where you see these amazing women and suddenly they go from being somebody who was like, oh, got all the interesting stories to suddenly being like happy doing a very dull job just because it was good for childcare. And I didn't want that. So
I totally understand your motivation. It was kind of like, okay, I'm going to be a mom and, I don't want this anymore. What about the introversion? Did that have anything to do? Because I can imagine how draining this job must have been for you as an introvert, or maybe that wasn't the case. I'm just wondering because the typical introvert is not usually the journalist who goes out there and interviews Obama and all these celebrities. So I'm just wondering, at any time, did you feel like I'm so exhausted doing this? And did you have this aha moment? Well, maybe it's because I'm an introvert.
I definitely would struggle in kind of when the adrenaline goes. I could go and ask questions and that would be okay. But I would struggle in environments where I had to sort of go into a new office, and I traveled a lot. So when I was traveling in Asia a lot, I was mainly based in Asia, and I would sort of fly into a new bureau. Let's say I fly into Kabul and I go and work in the Kabul bureau. I wouldn't be the person who would go in the office and be like, hi, I'm Lucy, and go and do the rounds. I would kind of slink into the corner. And I know I would like look longingly at kind of the real extroverts who could do that. And I would sort of try and make relationships where it's like, oh, do you want to go for a coffee? Or I'd wait. Like when I was the new girl in Beijing. So when I arrived in Beijing, it was in preparation for the Olympics. And they sent me there basically to kind of manage the coverage of the Olympics and like run the team. And then eventually they wanted me to run the bureau there. So I knew that I had to just kind of put my head down and work because there was so much to do. But at the same time, I would try and establish those relationships in like the kitchen or something so I could just have a one-to-one conversation rather than be like, oh, I'll talk to everyone in the office. And, some people would be very shouty and loud and I would kind of slink in the corner.
Right. So. Well, it sounds like, a lot of introverts who do kind of like this public persona, like public speaking or what you're doing, it sounds like you could just step into being that person, right? But then your natural self was more kind of in the background and just building one-on-one relationships, which is something that I've heard a lot of times before for introverts who are really good at, their job and stepping into the spotlight, but then they're like, okay, now I'm going to step out of it again and just do my thing. Yeah.
I think it's almost like, say, Beyonce would be Beyonce, and then when she steps on stage, she's Sasha Fierce.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether she's an introvert or not, but I sort of have that kind of feeling where it's like, right, okay, you've just got to do this.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I would be able to, I remember asking Tony Blair, like having to interview Tony Blair, and I had to ask him about the Iraq War and his role in it. And it was like, we'd had this he was really charming and really nice. Then I asked those questions and I was feeling myself shrinking. He looked at me like he suddenly went from being this charming man to being like absolutely terrifying.
Oh, God.
And I remember myself shrinking and thinking, don't play small. But it's so easy as an introvert to kind of want to shrink into the corner. And that was definitely a moment where I could feel myself shrinking visibly.
Yeah, because as a journalist, you always have to look for the conflict in a way. And for myself, and I know a lot of introverts, I'm like, stay away from the conflict, just get harmony. That's what we want. Yeah, that must have been just really those moments where you're just like, I have a job to do and this is what I'm here for and this is what I'm going to do. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when I started out in local radio, and this is 20 years ago, one of my first jobs was it was the death of Princess Diana, and journalists around that time were absolutely vilified and hated because they were perceived as the reason that she had been killed. And my patch covered the Althorp estate where Diana grew up. So we had to go and kind of report from this estate and get reaction from local people. And I just remember it was the same feeling again of just feeling like, okay, you're absolutely hated and you need to just kind of step up. Even though I wanted to slink in the corner, you just have to put yourself out there. And it really does require you just to kind of dig deep and say, you can do this, even when you really, really don't want to do it at all.
So if you compare your past to what you do now, how do you feel about what you're doing now? I would imagine it's a much more safe and positive environment because you get to work with entrepreneurs who come to you and say, look, Lucy, I need your help being great on video. So tell us a bit about, what you're doing now and how you generate revenue and compare it to what you did before.
So whereas in the past, it was me talking on camera or training journalists to talk on camera, be more confident, tell their stories better, I'm now flipping that round and working with entrepreneurs to the same skill set to basically improve their storytelling, whether that is on video or on blogs or social media. The process is actually very similar. I remember training a group of journalists in North Korea, for example, and I remember talking to them and saying about when you're talking on camera and when you're telling stories visually, you need to think of the audience. And I remember just making up this story of like my mum being at home watching TV while she's cooking dinner and having the news on. And I was saying, oh, she's cooking the peas, like as if you cook peas. But anyway, so, and I was kind of describing this story. And I still use that story for entrepreneurs today. It's the same process that you imagine the person that you're making your news story for, or you're making your Facebook live video or your YouTube presentation, whatever it is. Instead of thinking you're talking to thousands of people and you suddenly get intimidated by the process, you're just making a connection through the lens with one person. And that's exactly the same. And all broadcasters, whether they are talking as a presenter on a news channel or whether they're a radio show, it is the same. They just connect with one person, imagine one person, and talk to one person. And so that is an easy way where that same process flows, whatever you're doing, whether you're an entrepreneur or a journalist.
So again, to my question, do you like your job better now or the one you had before, or you like both and they're just very different?
I absolutely loved both. I mean, I loved the work I did when I was a journalist. It was very fulfilling and I was able to write about things and get to witness history in the making. So that was fascinating. And there was a great adrenaline rush and it was wonderful, but very, very all-consuming. And now my life is like at a slower pace, but it works brilliantly for me at this point in my life. I love the fact that I can juggle my business around my son, and I get to work with amazing people, and I love the positivity of it. And I love how I get to use my journalism skills and my coaching skills and combine those two. So I did my coaching masters while I was in Iraq. So I was desperate while in Iraq. I was setting up a TV station and working with Syrian refugees. So it was very, their stories were very traumatic and they'd witnessed terrible, terrible things. And it was such a wonderful way to be able to bring something positive to their experiences by helping them. By doing my coaching masters at the same time, I was able to work with them on a much deeper level than just saying, okay, this is how you do this thing. And I really fell in love with the coaching process and the way of working with people and helping them to really think things through more deeply, and so that they took ownership of it rather than feeling that they were being told to do something and taught to do something.
How did your introversion help you with the coaching, back in Iraq, but also today? What would you say were your superpowers, your introverted superpowers that you use every day in your work?
I think I'm very intuitive. So by the power of listening and being able to hold the silence and just listen to someone and let someone talk is a really powerful tool. And just being able to hold that space, and almost when you want to butt in, not butting in, just allowing them to think a bit more, because that's when, rather than feeling that you have to fill that dead space, allowing them just to have that thinking time, that's when they actually dig a bit deeper, and they usually find their most profound nuggets of thought of how they're going to move forward in their business, or how they're going to make that and do that next marketing campaign, or whatever it is. Or whether it's on a very personal level, they make some connection of why they're doing something a particular way and how they can move forward.
Listening is definitely a skill that we're pretty good at. It comes up a lot on the podcast. You said intuition as well. So you take basically what you've heard and then kind of use that right away in your coaching, I assume, right?
I try to start my coaching calls with like a little bit of meditation, just a 2-minute meditation, but really just getting somebody grounded and calm and relaxed. And when they're in that space where they're just much calmer and breathing more deeply and more relaxed, then I usually find that the space is more open, that I can then sense that certain things or tap into certain things that they might not necessarily be saying. But if you're in a kind of calmer space, it's easier to pick up on those things.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's another typical introvert skill. We just kind of have this other sense that just, you're able to read people, whether you see them or not. You just kind of get this feeling for the person. And from there, you can implement. So great. What about, something that you think is more challenging for you as now an introverted online entrepreneur? What do you think is kind of more difficult because you're an introvert?
Okay, so I struggle with networking. In my previous role, I would have to do a lot of networking and sitting by I remember, having to go for these dinners and sitting by like the Chinese foreign minister or something. And, so they're really senior people and you're kind of thinking, oh my God, no. And just not that they're not nice people, but you just have to, think I have to make small talk for 3 hours. And luckily, my dad is an introvert and he's a much greater introvert than I am, actually. And I learned social skills from my mother, who is very outgoing. And my father worked for the Foreign Office and we traveled a lot. And where small talk and all those kind of chit chats, cocktail parties, all of those things matter. And so I did learn those skills from my mother of kind of being able to do the chit chat, but I find it very stressful and very uncomfortable, particularly in a networking environment. I'll often go and then I used to come home in tears to my husband being like, oh, I can't do it. So although when I'm there, I've got better at it. And I call it the 5 Bs. I've got some sort of tips where it's so when I'm going on the way there, I put on some music. And so music reduces stress cortisol. So I sort of have a little boogie on the way to the event, or if I have to do a public speaking or some speech. And then when I get there, I go to the toilet and I, get myself in the cubicle and basically stretch out, make yourself as big as possible. So it's like, arms out in the air. And by doing that, it's an Amy Cuddy TED Talk where you basically make yourself bigger. So you kind of physiologically make yourself bigger. And I would do that, and breathing, remember to breathe, because I sort of, if I get nervous, I shallow breathe and I blah, blah, blah. And so pause, breathe. And then I just remember things like body language, have my shoulders back, and just remember to smile, because even if in the midst of feeling like, oh my God, I hate this, if I'm smiling, it sort of looks like you're enjoying yourself, even when you're absolutely terrified and hating it.
Yeah, that's my biggest struggle with networking events. I always find myself in conversation that I'm so bored, I could just drop dead. And I'm like, why did I come here again? And why does everybody always tell me their life story? And I'm not, I'm such a good listener and I just can't get out of. So yeah, I don't do networking anymore, or only if I'm invited as the speaker, because that's easier somehow, because I know I can just step into that role after people come to me. I don't have to go to them, because I talked about a topic and then they come to me with questions about that topic. So that makes it much easier for me. But yeah, networking is, as you probably imagine, it's kind of one of the topics that a lot of introverts are struggling with. And those are some good tips. I think so as well. I used to use an essential oil. Let me remember. Oh, I think it's geranium, the flower. And that helps you kind of block out negative energy. And so you just keep the positive energy within you and don't let any negative energy come into your body.
So, yeah. I'll remember that one. That's a good
yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the golden nuggets. I always like to ask about 3 golden nuggets. And the first one is about a personal habit, something that you do on a regular basis that you think has contributed to your success.
Meditation. It helps me be calm and focus and handle stress. So even if on days where I would be so incredibly busy, even if it was just while I was, walking to the office or walking to get a coffee, I would listen to something, a meditation. And there's some really great ones on the Chopra Center. They have 10-minute meditations or something. And so it doesn't have to be that you're kind of sitting in a dark corner or something. Obviously that's really good if you can do that. But I would find even in my busiest moments, if I just have that, it really helps me to stay calm, stay centered and focused. And I've recommended it to so many people. Even
How long have you been meditating?
I got into meditation in 2006. And yeah, it's really, that's helped me a lot. So I would definitely, even if you feel like I'm not a woo-woo person, and maybe you feel like your brain is too busy and it flickers everywhere, listening to a meditation can help you to just focus, even if you can't necessarily sit in a corner and meditate. But there are some amazing, I just bought it for my husband actually. You can do a weekend course or something to learn to meditate. And there's a guy who does meditation for stressed out people in environments. So he encourages you to meditate on the tube or public transport or sitting on a park bench. So it's very public meditation that helps you handle busy lives. I think it's a real skill that no matter how busy you are and how stressed you feel, meditation can really help you to manage your stress levels.
Yeah. And I think nowadays with, everybody has an iPhone or a mobile device. And so there's these great apps that we have available that probably in 2006 didn't exist yet. But now I'm thinking of Headspace. There is another one called Calm. So these are great places to learn how to meditate. And I definitely also recommend that as a habit. Yeah. Let's talk about something a bit less woo-woo, an internet resource, something that you use every day for your business.
So I really like Tailwind, which basically enables you to, if you're managing your social media, in fact, I'll mention 2 products. So Planoly is a great way for you to see the content of how your Instagram feed is going to look. And then on Tailwind, you can also put your Instagram content, map it out for the month. You can't see it in quite the same way, but it's really useful in the fact that you can basically set up all your content for the month. So you've got a post for every day or twice a day or however many times you want to post. And you just then on the day, it will ask you, do you want to post this? And then you have to manually kind of press yes. So you get past the Instagram rules about posting, but it means that you don't have to think every day like, oh, I need to post and I haven't posted. So that really helps. And great thing about Tailwind is that it also manages your Pinterest content. So you can schedule your pins, and Pinterest is such a great way to grow your business like organically, because if you're putting a post out there like 5 tips to grow your business, then people will pick that up and run with it. And whereas say Facebook or Instagram, you might do one post and then it disappears that day. This is evergreen. And so it's continually searched for and looked for. So you can really build up a sustained traffic to your website on a long-term basis.
Great. So Plannerly and Tailwind.
Yes. Plannerly is great just to look at how to, so on your desktop, you can set out your content for Instagram for the month. I get my VA to set it all up so she finds beautiful pictures, and it's a way of staying on top and doing all those things on social media, but not feeling overwhelmed with it.
Yeah, I think that's a big topic, right? Overwhelm is just like, what are all the things that I have to do for my online business? So yeah, those tools are helpful for that. Great. What about a book that you would recommend that you've read and you think that's a great fit for the online entrepreneurs who are introverted?
A book that really inspired me to be an entrepreneur. I've read it so many times, and I'm sure many other people have read it, but I would recommend, there's a new version of it. It's the Tim Ferriss 4-Hour Workweek book, which the premise of it has really spawned the online revolution of entrepreneurship. And so some of it is outdated now. I think it was written in 2006, 2005, I can't remember. But it really has some great learnings about you and how to schedule your time and manage your time and think through how you can map out your business. So it's not necessarily for introverts, but I think introverts are absolutely meant to do an online business, because it means that you can kind of really manage how that you have your contact with the world, and you know, you can work from home, you don't have to see anyone all day, and you can then choose how you see people rather than having to deal with like office politics and negotiating all those awful meetings.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. It's like you get to choose who you hang out with, right? Rather than putting up with the networking person that just tells you, their story and you're not really interested in it. Well, you get to meet people who you're interested in and listen to their story. Yeah,
yes. Yeah. And the wonderful thing about, there's lots of downsides to social media, but the wonderful thing is actually if something pops up in your Facebook feed or wherever and you don't want to see that person, or you can just click, don't want to see this.
Exactly.
So we can be much more selective about who we want to be exposed to in our world if we choose to be that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the reasons I specialize in LinkedIn. People always ask me, why LinkedIn? It's like the boring platform, it's the boring of the social media platforms. I'm like, yeah, I wonder why. Well, I realized that it's the one platform where you don't have to, constantly post about your private life and what your kids are doing. And because it's all business related, and I get to, choose to post things that are of value to me, but I also think are of value to other people, and it has nothing to do with my personal life. Just made that discovery recently.
That's a great, yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for this conversation, Lucy. We're coming to an end here, and I want to ask you the question that I ask all my guests. What are you grateful for today, this week, this year?
I'm so grateful for my lovely life. I'm so lucky. I have a wonderful husband and a gorgeous son, and I'm so blessed and very, very happy and lucky. A few years ago, I was single and miserable and doing a job that I wanted to do something different. And I'm so lucky to be doing exactly what I really wanted to do. And I remember writing in my diary, sorry if this is going on too long now. I remember writing in my notebook, going to see Tony Robbins and saying, and it was 2012, and I wrote down 4 things I wanted to be. And I said I wanted a husband, a baby, a house, and a career as a coach. And I'm doing all of those 4 things.
Wow,
so
there you go. Congratulations.
So I'm very lucky.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, for sharing this story with fellow introverted entrepreneurs. I'm sure they took a lot of little bits and nuggets out of our conversation that they can use to build their dream business and life. So thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. You'll find this episode's show notes at sarahsanacroce.com/episode 49. And if you're listening to the show on a mobile device, you can click on the description and you'll actually find all the clickable links in there. And to find out more about Lucy, go to lucygriffiths.com or facebook.com/lucygriffiths.com. So in letters, DOTCOM at the end. Thanks so much for listening. This is Sarah Sanacroce signing off from the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. Remember, you need to use your unique introverted superpowers in order to make a difference.